Say it again, I told my wife, because sometimes the moment that breaks a man is not the insult itself, but how easily everyone laughs after it. Madison Miller had just leaned across the white linen table at the company anniversary dinner, lifted her champagne glass, and said loud enough for 3 tables to hear, "Ethan is sweet, but ambition was never really his thing." The room did what rooms like that always do when money is present and kindness is optional. People smiled first, checking each other for permission. Then came the laughter, polished and controlled, the kind that does not sound cruel until you are the one standing inside it. I was 41 years old, wearing the same charcoal suit I had worn to investor meetings in New York, Dallas, and San Francisco, but to them I looked like a quiet husband in the corner, a man Madison had brought along, because leaving me home would have raised questions. The ballroom on the top floor of the hotel in downtown Denver shimmered under gold lights, with windows overlooking the city and the mountains sitting dark against the evening sky. Waiters moved between tables with plates of steak and glasses of iced water. Silverware clicked. Perfume and expensive cologne floated through the air. Everything looked elegant enough to hide how ugly people could be when they felt protected by applause. Madison stood beside the chief marketing officer, laughing like she had not just reduced 17 years of my life to a punchline. Her red dress caught the chandelier light every time she moved, and her smile had that sharp social brightness I had come to recognize over the years, the one she used when she wanted the room to love her more than the truth. I looked at her, waiting for the part where she softened it, where she reached for my hand, where she told them she was joking. She did none of those things. Instead, she tilted her head and added, "He is better at supporting from the background. Some men just are." That second sentence landed lower than the first, not because it surprised me, but because it confirmed what I had refused to name. This was not one careless comment after too much champagne. This was the story she had been telling people for years. Only now I was finally in the room to hear it. Across the table, her friend Lauren covered her mouth as she laughed. One of the vice presidents looked down at his plate, uncomfortable but not brave enough to help. Madison's boss, Richard Hale, leaned back with the satisfied grin of a man watching someone else do the dirty work for him. I felt heat move up my neck, but my hands stayed still. That is the thing people misunderstand about humiliation. They expect shouting, trembling, some dramatic collapse. But real humiliation can make you very calm. It narrows the room. It sharpens the sounds. It shows you exactly who is watching, who is enjoying it, and who is pretending not to see. I set my glass of water down carefully, making sure it did not spill. Madison glanced at me then, finally noticing the silence where my embarrassment should have been. Her smile flickered, just a little. "Ethan," she said softly, the warning tucked under my name. "Do not make this weird." That almost made me laugh. Not because it was funny, but because for years I had made everything easier for her. I had paid off the tax lien on her father's business without letting him know. I had introduced her company to the private lenders who saved their expansion when the bank walked away. I had held voting power through a quiet investment group nobody at that table had bothered to connect to me. I had spent a decade stepping back, not because I lacked ambition, but because I thought love meant letting my wife stand in the brightest part of the room. And now, in front of the same people who had benefited from my silence, she was using that silence as evidence that I was small. I looked around the table one more time, memorizing faces the way a man memorizes a contract before signing it. Then I turned back to Madison and spoke quietly enough that everyone had to stop laughing to hear me. "No," I said. "I think we are finally making it honest." The ballroom went still by inches. A fork paused halfway to someone's mouth. Richard's grin faded. Madison's eyes narrowed, not in fear yet, but in confusion, because she had never seen this version of me in public. She had seen the husband who carried her coat, corrected her grammar before speeches, and stood aside for photos. She had not seen the man who knew exactly where her company's fragile foundation rested, whose signatures were holding up parts of the floor beneath her heels. I stood, adjusted my jacket, and looked at the city lights beyond the glass. My voice stayed level. My heart did not. "Enjoy the rest of dinner," I said. "Tomorrow morning, everyone here is going to learn what background really means." Then I walked away from the table, not fast, not angry, not broken. Behind me, the laughter was gone. In its place was the sound I had been waiting for all night: silence. The next morning, Ethan Miller sat quietly at his sleek, minimalist home office desk, the soft morning light spilling through floor-to-ceiling windows, reflecting off the polished hardwood floors and the Chicago skyline beyond. His hands rested lightly on a leather portfolio filled with spreadsheets, contracts, and investment records, each meticulously organized and annotated, representing years of silent preparation and patient observation that no one at last night's gala had recognized. He sipped a steaming cup of black coffee, the aroma sharp but grounding, as his mind replayed every word Madison Miller had spoken, every laugh that had echoed across the dinner tables, and the subtle expressions of their colleagues and friends, cataloging behavior and attitude as evidence in a quiet, invisible ledger of control. The apartment was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional traffic murmur from below, a stark contrast to the previous evening's orchestrated spectacle, highlighting the shift from public humiliation to private calculation. Ethan methodically opened his laptop and began reviewing the shareholder records, identifying loopholes, voting rights, and clauses he had quietly acquired through prior investments. Each click and keystroke a deliberate step toward establishing a foundation of unassailable authority. His expression remained calm, controlled, betraying none of the internal tension that might have consumed another man. As he traced the chain of company control, noting dates, approvals, and contingencies, ensuring that every move he planned would be grounded in legal certainty and operational influence. Across the room, a framed photograph of Madison smiling at a company launch reminded him of the delicate balance between personal life and corporate maneuvering, and he allowed a faint, almost imperceptible smile, recognizing the irony that the woman who had humiliated him publicly was unaware of the depth of his silent influence over the very institution she celebrated. He drafted a detailed sequence of steps, from communicating with legal advisors to notifying key stakeholders, each action carefully ordered to maintain discretion while maximizing leverage, the plan designed to unfold seamlessly, allowing his authority to emerge naturally, without confrontation or spectacle. Ethan reviewed the company memos, identifying where Madison had overextended decisions, noting the financial and operational impacts, and mapping out the precise moment when the evidence, once revealed, would create an undeniable shift in perception and control. The atmosphere in the room remained serene, the contrast between the external calm and the intricate internal strategy palpable, as he prepared for the moment when patience, observation, and precise action would converge to redefine the power dynamic. Every document, annotation, and record was accounted for, each serving as a tool to ensure that when the time came, Ethan's hidden power would be recognized clearly and irreversibly, reinforcing both the professional and personal narrative he had cultivated quietly for years. He leaned back in his chair for a moment, allowing his thoughts to settle, visualizing the upcoming interactions, the subtle expressions on Madison's face, and the reactions of colleagues as the truth of his authority gradually emerged, a slow and deliberate revelation that relied on timing, precision, and an unshakable calm. The morning sunlight continued to stream across the desk, illuminating papers and digital screens, reinforcing the sense of clarity, purpose, and control that Ethan had maintained, transforming the memory of public humiliation into a foundation for strategic ascendancy and silent empowerment, setting the stage for the inevitable shift in perception, influence, and respect that would soon redefine every relationship and decision within the company. Madison came into the home office at 8:26, already dressed for the day in a cream blazer and tailored black pants, her phone in one hand and a silver travel mug in the other, moving with the same crisp confidence she used in crowded rooms. Ethan did not look up right away. He let the cursor blink on the spreadsheet, let the quiet stretch, let her feel the difference between a husband waiting to be managed and a man already occupied with something larger than her mood. "We need to talk about last night," she said. Her voice was controlled, but the edges were tight. Ethan closed one folder, placed it neatly on top of another, and finally met her eyes. "All right." She stepped farther into the room, glancing at the documents on his desk. "You embarrassed me." There it was. Not, "I hurt you." Not, "I should not have said that." Not even, "I am sorry." She had taken the wound she made and turned it into a stain on her dress. Ethan felt the old ache try to rise in his chest, The familiar pull to explain, to make peace, to smooth the corner before anyone got cut. He did not feed it. He reached for his coffee, took one slow sip, and set the mug down exactly where it had been. "That is an interesting place to start," he said. Madison's jaw tightened. "You stood up in front of my colleagues and made a strange threat." "I made a statement." "You made people uncomfortable." Ethan almost smiled. People had become uncomfortable only when he stopped acting grateful for disrespect. He turned his chair slightly toward the window, where the city was bright now, morning traffic moving below like silver threads through downtown streets. "People were comfortable when I was the joke," he said. That seemed to work for everyone. Madison looked away for half a second, and that half second told him she remembered every word she had said. "It was a dinner," she replied. "People tease. Richard teases everyone. Richard does not tease people with power over him." The sentence changed the room. Madison looked back at him, and for the first time that morning, uncertainty moved across her face. Ethan let it sit there. He had learned that silence after a truth can do more work than another paragraph. She set her travel mug on the edge of the desk. "What is that supposed to mean?" Ethan opened the leather portfolio and removed one page. Not the strongest page, not the final page, just enough to place a hairline crack in her certainty. It was a notice from a private investment group, dated 18 months earlier, tied to the rescue financing her company had accepted after their expansion nearly collapsed. He placed it on the desk between them. Madison looked at the logo first, then the signature line, then the entity name. Caldwell Meridian Holdings. Her lips parted slightly. "Why do you have this?" Ethan folded his hands. "Because I signed it." The office went quiet except for the low hum of the air conditioning. Outside, a truck backed up somewhere on the street below, its warning tone faint and distant, a small mechanical sound in a room where something human was finally becoming clear. Madison picked up the page, reading faster now, her eyes moving line by line with the urgency of a woman realizing she had been standing on a bridge without knowing who built it. "This was the bridge facility," she said. "This saved the Denver rollout." Ethan nodded. "It kept payroll steady, paid 3 vendors, and stopped the board from replacing senior leadership that quarter." Her fingers tightened around the paper. "You never told me." He looked at the framed photograph behind her, the one from that same Denver launch. Madison on stage, smiling under bright lights. Ethan standing near the edge of the frame like someone who had wandered into the wrong memory. "You did not ask who caught the company when it slipped," he said. "You only asked me to stay out of the spotlight." Madison lowered the document slowly. The confidence on her face had not disappeared, but it had started to rearrange itself into caution. "Ethan," she said, softer now, "what else have you been involved in?" He closed the portfolio with one hand, the leather making a quiet sound against the desk. "Enough that your office should not schedule anything important before 10:30. Her eyes sharpened. "Why?" Ethan stood, buttoned his jacket, and picked up the portfolio. "Because by then, Richard and the board will understand the difference between a supportive husband and an invisible stakeholder." Madison did not move. For once, she had no polished answer, no social smile, no quick sentence to put him back in the harmless category where she had kept him for years. Ethan walked past her toward the door, calm on the outside, but with something heavy shifting beneath his ribs. He had wanted her respect once. Now he wanted the truth to stop being optional. By 9:15, Ethan Miller was in the back seat of a black sedan moving through downtown Denver, watching the glass towers slide past the window while the mountains sat pale and distant beyond the city. His leather portfolio rested beside him, heavier in meaning than weight, filled with the kind of documents people ignore until those documents decide the room. He had not raised his voice at Madison. He had not argued in the hallway. He had simply left the apartment after telling her the truth had an appointment. Now, with traffic slowing near the business district, he let the quiet of the car settle around him and replayed the years that had led to this morning. People thought power announced itself with corner offices, expensive watches, and loud opinions at dinner tables. Ethan knew better. Real power often arrived as a wire transfer nobody celebrated, a signature on a rescue note, a voting clause written in language so dry that arrogant men skimmed past it. That was how Caldwell Meridian Holdings had entered Madison's company. Not with cameras, not with speeches. With money at the exact moment the company needed oxygen and was too proud to admit it was gasping. He remembered the night Madison came home 3 years earlier, dropping her keys in a bowl by the door, saying the Denver rollout was just a temporary strain. Her smile had been too bright. Her shoulders had been too high. Ethan had seen fear under the polish, the way a man sees smoke before flames show through a wall. She never asked for help directly. Madison rarely did. She talked around need, dressed it as strategy, wrapped it in optimism until most people mistook panic for confidence. Ethan had called 2 lenders that night, then a private attorney in Seattle, then his own financial officer before dawn. By the end of the week, her company had breathing room. By the end of the month, Madison was on stage calling the recovery proof of disciplined leadership. Ethan stood in the back and clapped. That memory used to feel like love. After last night, it felt like evidence. His phone buzzed once. Madison. He looked at the screen but did not answer. A text appeared a moment later. Please do not blindside me at my office. Ethan read it twice, not because he was tempted, but because the sentence revealed her still fighting the wrong problem. She was worried about surprise, not truth. He typed back only one line. I am not blindsiding you. I am correcting the record. The sedan turned onto Lawrence Street and stopped outside a 12-story building with mirrored windows and a silver sign bearing the company's name. Ethan stepped out into the thin morning wind, buttoned his jacket, and looked up at the place where Madison had built her public identity. Through the lobby glass, he could see employees moving with coffee cups and laptop bags, ordinary people trying to do ordinary work beneath decisions made far above them. That was why he had waited until now. Not for revenge, not for pride. Because a company could survive embarrassment. It could not survive leadership that confused image with judgment. At the security desk, the young receptionist recognized him immediately. She smiled the way people smile at someone they believe belongs to someone important, but is not important himself. Mr. Miller, she said. Madison has not come in yet. Ethan placed his identification on the counter. I am not here as Madison's guest. Her fingers paused above the keyboard. A small shift, barely visible. But he had become good at noticing small shifts. I have a 10:30 meeting with the board and Richard Hale, he continued. Caldwell Meridian Holdings notified them this morning. The receptionist looked at the screen, typed, then sat a little straighter. Yes, sir. Conference room, 12B. The elevator is to your right. Sir. One syllable, but it told him the file had loaded. The building already knew what the ballroom had not. Ethan crossed the lobby without rushing. In the elevator, his reflection stared back from the brushed metal doors, calm face, tired eyes, charcoal suit, one hand resting on the portfolio handle. He did not look like a man chasing respect. He looked like a man arriving to collect something already owed. When the doors opened on the 12th floor, the atmosphere changed. Conversations softened. Heads turned behind glass walls. Richard Hale stood near the conference room entrance with 2 executives beside him, his smile fixed in place like a sign bolted crooked to a storefront. Madison arrived from the opposite hallway at the same time, slightly breathless, her cream blazer sharp, her expression controlled but tight around the eyes. For a moment, husband and wife stood 20 feet apart in the corridor, surrounded by people who had laughed the night before and were now trying to understand why the quiet man had been given the largest conference room in the building. Richard stepped forward first. Ethan, he said, voice warm enough for witnesses. I think there has been some confusion. Ethan looked at him, then at Madison, then at the closed conference room door behind them. There has, he said. That is why we are going inside. Madison's face paled by a shade. Richard's smile faltered. Ethan opened the door and walked in, placing the portfolio at the head of the table before anyone could tell him where to sit. The conference room smelled faintly of polished wood and fresh coffee as Ethan Miller settled into the chair at the head of the table, his portfolio opened before him, its leather surface reflecting the soft morning light coming through the tall glass windows. Madison Miller entered shortly after, the crisp lines of her cream blazer matching the sharp edge of her heels clicking against the polished marble floor, and she paused briefly at the doorway, her eyes scanning the room, noting the gathered executives and the subtle tension that had replaced the usual casual chatter. Ethan remained calm, his expression measured, observing Madison's entrance without a hint of triumph, simply aware that the balance of authority was about to shift, the silence around him amplifying the weight of his presence. While the documents he had meticulously prepared waited to speak louder than any argument, The executives, including Richard Hale, leaned slightly forward, sensing the subtle shift, the room charged with anticipation, the kind of corporate tension that cannot be manufactured but arrives naturally when power, preparation, and timing align perfectly. Madison approached the table cautiously, her posture still confident, but her eyes betrayed an almost imperceptible doubt, and Ethan nodded slightly, in acknowledgement of her awareness. Not as a gesture of concession, but recognition of the moment, she finally saw the extent of the groundwork he had laid, the quiet authority he had cultivated over years of observation, patient investments, and strategic patience. He began presenting, voice steady and precise, walking them through spreadsheets, shareholder agreements, and legal notes that outlined responsibilities and decision-making authority, each point carefully highlighted to ensure clarity and unavoidable acknowledgement of his influence. Madison followed along silently, noting the precision with which Ethan organized the documents, the way each signature and approval formed an unassailable structure around him, and the room responded without drama, each executive absorbing the information with subtle nods, realizing that the man, who had been quiet and unassuming for years, was the orchestrator of the company's stability. Ethan paused occasionally, allowing the silence to emphasize points, letting the weight of control and preparation become palpable, his eyes occasionally meeting Madison's, conveying the depth of his calculated patience and the strategic foresight that had led to this moment. She realized, without words, that the man she had once underestimated now commanded attention without force, that his influence was built not on confrontation, but on meticulous preparation, timing, and the quiet accumulation of authority. The morning light shifted across the room, glinting off glass, polished metal, and the crisp folds of documents, accentuating the orderly arrangement and the clarity of the narrative Ethan constructed for the board, a narrative that made it impossible for anyone, including Madison, to dispute his role or the decisions he had guided. By the time the presentation concluded, the executives had aligned with his vision, their posture, tone, and subtle gestures confirming that the power dynamics had shifted irrevocably, and Madison remained seated, absorbing the implications of the unseen influence that had quietly shaped every outcome, the balance between them now recalibrated with undeniable clarity. Ethan closed the portfolio carefully, allowing the soft click of the leather cover to punctuate the room, a quiet signal of completion. And as he looked around, he felt the calm authority settling, the silent acknowledgement of years of preparation finally recognized, establishing him as the unchallenged orchestrator of control and influence in both the corporate and personal spheres. Richard Hale was the first to speak after the portfolio closed, because men like Richard never trusted silence unless they owned it. He leaned back in his chair, smoothing one hand over his tie, trying to gather the room back into the version of itself where he still controlled the temperature. "This is impressive paperwork, Ethan," he said, his voice carefully pleasant. "But let us not pretend a financing structure gives someone operational insight overnight." A few months earlier, that sentence might have sounded confident. In that room, after those documents, it sounded like a man turning a locked doorknob and hoping nobody noticed. Ethan looked at him without hurry. "You are right," he said. "Paperwork alone does not create operational insight." Richard's mouth curved slightly, thinking he had found an opening. Ethan turned one page in the thin folder he had not presented yet. "That is why I brought the operating review." The chief financial officer, a narrow-faced man named Thomas Reed, sat straighter as Ethan slid copies down the table. Madison's eyes followed the papers as if they were moving on their own. Ethan watched her hands remain folded, perfectly still, but he knew stillness could be as revealing as motion. She was beginning to understand that this was not a stunt. This was not a wounded husband making noise after a bad dinner. This was a man who had spent years listening while everyone else performed certainty. "For the last 18 months, Ethan continued, Caldwell Meridian Holdings has received quarterly reporting under the terms of the bridge agreement. Cash position, vendor liabilities, delayed receivables, hiring expansion, regional performance, and executive compensation adjustments." Richard's smile thinned. "Those reports are standard." "They are," Ethan said. "The pattern inside them is not." Thomas Reed lowered his gaze to the page, and Ethan saw recognition cross his face before he could hide it. There it was. The first honest witness. Ethan did not push. He let the room catch up. Outside the glass walls, employees moved through the hallway with laptops and paper coffee cups. Ordinary people walking past a room where their futures were being weighed by men and women who had spent too much time protecting appearances. Ethan pointed to the second section. The Denver rollout was presented to the board as profitable within 2 quarters. It was not. Marketing spend was shifted into vendor credits to soften the loss. The customer acquisition cost was reported without including the full regional event budget. And the 3 largest contracts used in the investor update were renewals, not new business. Richard's chair creaked softly as he moved forward. "Careful," he said. The word carried warning, but Ethan heard fear underneath it. Madison looked at Richard then, sharply, and that glance mattered. For years, she had trusted men who sounded certain because certainty photographed well. Now she was looking at the numbers behind the pose. Ethan kept his voice level. "I am being careful. That is why everyone has the same documents." Thomas cleared his throat. "The figures are accurate," he said quietly. Richard turned toward him. "Thomas." The chief financial officer did not look up. "They are accurate, Richard." The room changed again. Not loudly, not with gasps or dramatic looks. Just a shift in posture, a collective leaning away from a story that had begun to smell like smoke. Madison's face held together, but barely. Ethan remembered her on stage after that same Denver rollout, accepting applause, thanking Richard, thanking the team, thanking everyone except the anonymous capital that had kept the lights on long enough for the applause to happen. He had not needed credit then. He had told himself love did not keep score. But respect does. Respect keeps a ledger even when love refuses to look at the balance. Richard tried one more angle. This is a private marital issue being dressed up as governance. Ethan closed the operating review halfway and looked at him. "Last night was private until you made it public. This morning is governance because your decisions made it necessary." No one spoke. Madison lowered her eyes to the report in front of her, reading the highlighted lines with a tension around her mouth that Ethan had never seen in boardrooms before. Not embarrassment. Accountability. It looked unfamiliar on her, but not impossible. The chairman, who had been silent through most of the presentation, folded his hands on the table. "Mr. Miller, what action are you requesting?" Ethan had waited for that question. He opened the final page and turned it toward the chairman. "Immediate suspension of discretionary expansion approvals. Independent review of regional reporting. Temporary oversight of finance and investor communications by a representative appointed through Caldwell Meridian Holdings. And a formal evaluation of executive leadership, including Richard Hale's role in misrepresenting performance." Richard's face lost color by degrees. Madison inhaled softly. The chairman read the page, then passed it to the director beside him. Ethan sat back, not victorious, not relieved, just steady. The truth had finally reached the table, and unlike laughter, it did not need permission to stay. The chairman did not call for a vote right away. He sat with the final page in front of him, reading through Ethan Miller's requested actions while the room held itself in a tense, polished silence. Richard Hale stared at the document as if it had personally betrayed him, one hand resting near his water glass, his smile completely gone now. Madison sat 2 chairs away from Ethan, her shoulders still straight, her face composed, but her eyes were fixed on the highlighted sections of the operating review with a seriousness that made her look different from the woman at the dinner table. That woman had laughed beneath chandeliers. This woman was reading consequences. Ethan noticed the difference, and for a second, it hurt more than he expected. He had wanted her to see him for years, but not like this. Not through clauses and misreported figures. Not with a boardroom full of people witnessing the collapse of a story she had helped maintain. Still, truth rarely arrives in the outfit we prefer. It comes dressed in whatever we ignored long enough. The chairman finally looked up. "Thomas," he said, turning to the chief financial officer, "can you confirm whether the reporting concerns are material?" Thomas Reed removed his glasses, wiped them once with a folded cloth, then put them back on as though buying himself the courage to speak plainly. "Yes," he said, "they are material." Richard's head turned sharply. "Thomas, think carefully." Thomas looked at him then, tired but steady. "I have been thinking carefully for 6 months." The sentence moved through the room like a slow crack across ice. Ethan stayed still. He had known Thomas was close to breaking. The quarterly reports told one story, but the notes buried in the footers told another. Delayed approvals, repeated reversals, regional managers asking for clarification that never came. Ethan had not needed to pressure him. He had only needed to create a room where honesty had somewhere to stand. The chairman leaned back. Why was this not brought forward sooner? Thomas swallowed. Because every time I raised concerns, I was told the optics were being managed and that questioning the expansion would damage investor confidence. Richard lifted his hand slightly. Because panic helps nobody. Leadership requires composure. Ethan looked at him. Composure without correction is theater. Madison's gaze shifted from Richard to Ethan, and something in her expression softened, not into apology, not yet, but into recognition. She had used composure that way too. A polished smile at dinners. A dismissive joke when people got too close to the truth. A graceful hand over an ugly sentence. She knew the costume because she had worn it. The chairman turned the page again. Mr. Miller, who would serve as the interim oversight representative. Ethan opened a slimmer folder and slid one resume forward. Angela Brooks, former audit partner, 15 years in retail operations. No personal connection to me, Madison, Richard, or the current executive team. She starts with finance, investor communications, and regional reporting. Her authority would be limited to oversight and corrective recommendations pending the board review. The independent director near the window nodded slowly. That is reasonable. Richard gave a bitter laugh under his breath. Reasonable? This is a takeover dressed as responsibility. Ethan did not react to the word takeover. He had expected it. Men losing control often rename accountability as an attack. No, Ethan said. A takeover would replace the room. This gives the room a chance to function properly. The chairman looked around the table. We will proceed to a preliminary vote on the temporary measures. Madison's fingers tightened around her pen. Ethan saw it, the small motion of someone realizing that the morning had passed the point of persuasion and entered the machinery of decision. One by one, the board members gave their vote. Yes, yes, yes. Thomas hesitated, then said yes with a quietness that sounded like relief. Madison was last. The chairman looked at her. Madison. The room seemed to narrow around her. Ethan did not look away, but he did not plead with his eyes either. This was not about saving his pride anymore. It was about whether she could choose truth when Image was watching. Madison drew one slow breath. Yes, she said. Richard stared at her as if the word had struck him, but she kept her eyes on the table. The chairman recorded the vote. The temporary oversight measures are approved. No applause followed. Just the soft sound of pens moving, laptops closing, and power changing hands without spectacle. Ethan felt the weight of it settle, not as triumph, but as responsibility. Madison finally turned toward him, her face pale but clear. I did not know it was this bad, she said quietly. Ethan held her gaze. You did not want to know who was keeping it from getting worse. That sentence landed between them with more force than any speech. She looked down, and for the first time all morning, the polished executive mask slipped enough for Ethan to see the woman underneath it, ashamed, uncertain, and finally awake. Richard pushed back his chair and stood, but the room no longer rose with him. That was how Ethan knew the shift was real. Not because Richard had lost a vote, but because his movement no longer controlled anyone else's. Richard did not storm out, because men who build their reputations on polish rarely allow themselves the luxury of looking openly defeated. He gathered his papers slowly, adjusted the cuffs of his shirt, and gave the room a careful smile that had lost its audience. I will cooperate with the review, he said, but his voice had the flat sound of a sentence written by an attorney, not a man who believed it. The chairman nodded once, already looking at the next document. That was the final insult to Richard's ego. Not anger, not punishment, replacement by procedure. Ethan Miller watched him walk to the door, past the glass wall where two assistants looked up from their desks, sensing something had changed without knowing the shape of it. Richard paused near Madison, perhaps expecting a word, a glance, some sign that she still stood with him against the quiet man at the head of the table. Madison did not give it. She sat with both hands around her pen, eyes lowered to the report Ethan had presented, as if reading it again could undo the fact that she had helped laugh at the man who had been holding parts of her career together. Richard left without another word, and the door closed softly behind him. The meeting continued for another 20 minutes, moving into practical matters: communication to employees, vendor reassurances, restrictions on new spending, a 30-day review calendar, and the official appointment of Angela Brooks as interim oversight representative. Ethan spoke only when necessary. He had learned long ago that people trust a man more when he does not try to fill every inch of air with proof that he belongs. The proof was already on the table. Thomas Reed answered questions more freely now, his voice gaining steadiness as the room shifted from defense to repair. The independent director asked about cash coverage. Angela's start date was confirmed for Monday. Legal would send notices by close of business. Every step was ordinary, procedural, almost boring, and that made it beautiful to Ethan in a way he could not explain. Last night had been theater. This was structure. Theater could humiliate a man for 5 minutes. Structure could change the next 5 years. When the meeting ended, chairs moved back, folders closed, and people stood with the careful energy of professionals leaving a room that had taught them something expensive. The chairman shook Ethan's hand near the door. "Your restraint this morning was appreciated," he said. Ethan looked through the glass at the hallway, where employees passed with coffee cups, unaware their jobs had just been steadied by decisions they would never fully hear about. "Restraint is only useful when it leads somewhere," he said. The chairman nodded like he understood, then left with Thomas and the directors. Soon only Ethan and Madison remained. The conference room felt larger without witnesses, or maybe the silence between them had finally taken up all the empty seats. Madison stood slowly, smoothing the front of her blazer though it was already perfect. "I owe you an apology," she said. Ethan closed his portfolio but did not pick it up yet. "For last night." Her eyes lifted to his. "For more than last night." That was the first honest sentence she had given him since the dinner. It did not fix anything. Honest sentences rarely do at first. They only mark the place where repair might begin, if both people are brave enough to stand there. Madison looked toward the chair Richard had occupied, then back at Ethan. "I let people believe you were small because it made my story cleaner," she said, voice low. "I told myself you preferred the background. I never asked whether I had pushed you there." Ethan felt something move in his chest, not forgiveness, not yet, but the old ache of remembering when he had wanted this conversation so badly he would have accepted a weaker version of it. "You did push," he said, "and I stepped back because I thought that was love." Madison's mouth tightened. "I confused your support with permission to disrespect you." Outside the room, a printer started somewhere down the hall, a dull mechanical rhythm returning the office to normal. Inside, nothing felt normal. Ethan finally picked up the portfolio. "The company has a review now," he said. "So do we." Madison nodded, absorbing the boundary without arguing. That mattered. He walked to the door, and she followed, not beside him yet, but not against him either. In the hallway, the receptionist looked up, her expression different from when he arrived. People always notice power after someone else names it. Ethan did not slow down for the attention. Madison did. He saw it from the corner of his eye, the way she looked at the employees looking at him, and for once there was no embarrassment in her face. Only recognition. They reached the elevator in silence. When the doors opened, Ethan stepped inside first. Madison entered after him, leaving a few inches between them that felt like the honest distance of a marriage learning where the cracks really were. As the elevator descended, their reflections appeared in the polished metal doors, the husband no longer hidden, the wife no longer certain, and behind both of them a company that would never again mistake noise for strength. The elevator opened onto the 12th floor, and the hallway stretched before Ethan Miller and Madison Miller, the polished marble floors reflecting the morning light in long, uninterrupted lines. The office had begun its day in routine motion. Assistants carrying laptops, a faint hum of the air conditioning, and the distant clatter of shoes against tile. Ethan walked with measured steps, portfolio in hand, each movement precise, controlled, demonstrating authority without aggression. Madison followed a few feet behind, her posture elegant, expression composed, but her eyes betrayed the lingering tension from the morning's revelations. As they reached the conference room, Ethan stopped and looked back at her, noting the subtle shift in her demeanor, a blend of recognition, humility, and the faintest trace of apprehension, knowing she understood the magnitude of the oversight now under his command. They entered the room and were met with a group of department heads already assembled, their chatter softening as they noted Ethan's presence. The room smelled faintly of polished wood and freshly brewed coffee, a neutral backdrop to the subtle power dynamics at play. Ethan set his portfolio on the head of the table, opened it to reveal supporting documentation for the board's oversight measures, and began to summarize the sequence of implementation, review schedules, reporting lines, and checks for compliance, every point outlined to leave no ambiguity. Madison listened silently, occasionally glancing at the documents. Absorbing the detailed breakdown of accountability, the chain of command clearly reinforced her previous assumptions about effortless control, now recalibrated in real time. The assistants outside the glass walls glanced in, sensing the quiet shift, the room's energy focused, and as Ethan spoke, he observed the reactions of each attendee. Nods of acknowledgement, subtle changes in posture, the recognition that authority had been redefined through careful preparation rather than confrontation. Madison's expression softened incrementally, an internal acknowledgement of the limits she had previously ignored, and a tentative understanding that the man she had underestimated now commanded respect not through force, but through foresight and calculated patience. Ethan concluded the overview, closed the portfolio with a soft click, and looked around the table, his gaze lingering briefly on Madison. The measures are temporary, designed to ensure stability and transparency, he said evenly, his voice calm but carrying the weight of decisions already backed by evidence. Madison took a deep breath and nodded once, a subtle gesture of acceptance and recognition of the reality she now faced. Outside, the office continued its routine, unaware of the precise orchestration that had just taken place, while inside, a quiet recalibration had occurred. Authority had shifted, accountability was clear, and the previously hidden power Ethan had cultivated over years was now openly acknowledged, changing the dynamics between husband and wife, executive and board, in ways that would ripple through the company and their lives in measured, undeniable ways. After the meeting, Ethan Miller and Madison Miller walked down the wide hallway toward the main elevator, the quiet of the office punctuated only by the soft clicking of their shoes on polished marble and the low hum of ventilation. The hallway lights reflected off the floor in long, linear patterns, mirroring the precision and structure that had just been established in the boardroom, and Ethan kept the portfolio under his arm, steady, signaling that his presence was deliberate and controlled. Without a need for demonstration, Madison walked slightly behind him, her blazer fitted, her expression composed yet thoughtful, as she processed the morning's events, realizing how deeply Ethan's patience, preparation, and silent investments had ensured the stability of her company while remaining unseen for so many years. Employees moved past them with laptops, coffee cups, and the normal chatter of office life. Unaware of the subtle power shift that had just occurred, the weight of authority silently acknowledged by every attendee in the boardroom, and now permeating the floors above and below. Ethan paused near the elevator, looking at Madison briefly, noting the change in her posture, the small adjustments in the way she held herself. A mixture of respect, humility, and careful recognition that the man she had, once thought gentle and accommodating, had orchestrated a framework of control so thorough that it would govern operations even without her immediate awareness. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, the brushed metal reflecting their images, and Ethan stepped in first, his movements calm and deliberate, Madison following, leaving a few inches between them that signified both acknowledgement and space for reflection. Inside the elevator, they were alone except for the echo of their steps and the quiet hum of the machinery, the mirrors multiplying their figures as if the room itself were analyzing them, showing a couple who had navigated public humiliation, strategic revelation, and recalibration of authority, standing together yet apart, each processing the recalibrated dynamic between them. Ethan finally spoke, his voice low and measured. The board now understands the depth of our work, the effort behind every decision, and the foundation we have built. Madison nodded, absorbing the weight of the statement, recognizing that for years she had misjudged him, seeing only a quiet husband when there had been an architect of stability and influence. The elevator descended smoothly, a soft vibration under their feet, as Ethan considered the next steps. ensuring the company continued to function while transparency and oversight were maintained, all without needing to assert force or make spectacle, knowing that the morning had proven the efficacy of quiet, calculated control. Madison shifted slightly, glancing at Ethan with an expression that mixed relief and recognition, acknowledging that his actions had not been for personal pride, but to protect the institution they both depended on, while also challenging her own assumptions about his capabilities and judgment. The elevator slowed to the ground floor, doors opening onto the main lobby where sunlight streamed through large windows, casting long shadows that mirrored the clarity of accountability now present. And as they walked together toward the exit, the air carried a sense of inevitability and structure, the unspoken understanding that the morning had permanently altered both their personal and professional dynamic. Ethan's steps remained measured, deliberate, each one reinforcing the sense that authority had been redefined not through confrontation but through patience, foresight, and strategic patience, while Madison's gaze stayed forward, thoughtful, understanding that her previously comfortable narratives had shifted, that trust and respect had to be recalibrated, and that the next decisions they would make together would be guided by the clarity and control Ethan had quietly imposed, transforming not just the boardroom, but the foundation of their shared life and the future of the company. By mid-morning, Ethan Miller had returned to his home office, the city skyline glowing through the tall windows as the sun climbed higher, casting long, angular shadows across the polished hardwood floors and scattered documents. He set the portfolio down carefully on the desk, opened it to the section reserved for personal notes and reflections, and leaned back in the chair, allowing a brief moment of stillness to absorb the morning's events and the subtle shifts that had occurred in both the company and his personal life. Madison Miller entered silently, closing the door behind her, carrying a tablet and a small notebook, her posture straight but relaxed, and she paused at the desk edge, observing Ethan with a mix of curiosity and tentative acknowledgement, the air between them carrying a weight of unsaid recognition and understanding. Ethan gestured toward the chair across from him, inviting her to sit, and she complied, keeping a careful distance while her eyes scanned the pages and the sunlight reflecting off the portfolio's leather, noting the meticulous organization and the detailed account of every step he had taken to secure the company's stability, the timeline of oversight and interventions, and the documented evidence that had ensured no misstep went unnoticed. She exhaled softly, the sound almost lost in the hum of the office, and said, "I see now how much you were doing behind the scenes." Her voice steady but tinged with respect and faint remorse. Ethan nodded, not with pride, but with quiet confirmation. Years of preparation often go unnoticed until the right moment arrives, he replied, his tone measured and calm, emphasizing the strategy and patience that had defined his actions, and he saw her processing the reality that his silent influence had shaped the company's trajectory and prevented operational failures that could have cascaded into public crises. They spent the next hour reviewing projections, noting adjustments in cash flow, vendor relations, and regional operations, each discussion highlighting the depth of foresight Ethan had applied, the thoroughness of his documentation, and the care taken to protect the company without drawing attention to himself, all while Madison contributed observations, acknowledging her own gaps in oversight and beginning to recalibrate her understanding of leadership, authority, and responsibility. Outside, the city moved with its usual rhythm, unaware of the private recalibration occurring in a high-rise office, where two people who shared both life and business navigated the complexities of power, trust, and recognition, gradually aligning on a new understanding of mutual respect and accountability. Each word and gesture weighted with the lessons of the morning and the strategic foresight that had quietly guided every action. Ethan closed the portfolio finally, letting the soft click resonate in the silent room, and looked at Madison, who returned his gaze with steady eyes and a subtle nod. The unspoken acknowledgement that boundaries had shifted, respect had been earned through action rather than words, and the partnership that had once relied on appearances now rested on clarity, trust, and shared insight into the responsibilities and consequences that governed both the company and their personal lives, forming a foundation for future decisions that would be measured, deliberate, and mutually acknowledged. The late morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the home office, casting long, soft patterns across the hardwood floor as Ethan Miller and Madison Miller sat together, each with a tablet in hand, reviewing follow-up items from the board meeting earlier. The room was quiet except for the subtle tapping of fingers on screens, the occasional rustle of paper, and the muted hum of the city beyond the glass, creating a calm backdrop that contrasted sharply with the tension and strategic maneuvering of the morning. Ethan leaned slightly forward, pointing to financial summaries and regional performance charts, explaining the precise reasoning behind the temporary oversight measures, the way each decision aligned with prior board approvals and investor expectations, his voice steady, deliberate, and filled with quiet authority that demanded attention without raising volume or using drama. Madison listened intently, occasionally glancing up to meet his eyes, absorbing the depth of preparation and the meticulous care that had gone into ensuring both transparency and stability for the company, her respect growing for the man she had once underestimated, realizing that his influence was always present even when unseen, and that the authority he exercised now was not about domination but about structure, foresight, and responsibility. Outside, the office continued its usual rhythm, employees moving through hallways with laptops, coffee cups, and soft conversation, unaware of the foundational changes in governance taking place within the quiet, high-rise sanctuary, while inside, husband and wife were recalibrating their understanding of power, collaboration, and trust, discussing the implications of the interim oversight, next steps for regional reporting, and ways to reinforce communication between departments to prevent errors or misinterpretation, their dialogue precise, professional, yet revealing subtle personal acknowledgement of the morning's revelations. Madison's gestures were thoughtful, pointing to sections of the report and asking questions about timelines, compliance measures, and performance metrics, demonstrating a shift from prior assumptions about control, showing that she now fully appreciated the invisible support and strategic intervention Ethan had provided over the months, realizing that respect and partnership were based on awareness and accountability rather than appearances or hierarchy. Ethan responded calmly to each inquiry, giving context and historical insight, showing patience with clarifications, and providing guidance on how to implement recommendations without disrupting ongoing operations, his presence reinforcing confidence, not fear, in those decisions, while Madison adjusted her own understanding of leadership and influence, acknowledging the precision and foresight that had been necessary to maintain stability through unforeseen challenges and beginning to plan her own approach in alignment with this new perspective. The conversation shifted naturally from financial details to broader strategic alignment, highlighting the importance of transparency, communication, and shared responsibility. And as the discussion progressed, both Ethan and Madison noted the subtle, but undeniable, shift in their professional dynamic, a balance between trust and accountability that had not existed before, and one that would continue to shape their interactions in the company and in their personal life, creating a foundation for cooperation and clarity moving forward. By the time the session concluded, both were standing, gathering devices and notes, and there was a sense of calm and understanding, a quiet acknowledgement that the morning had fundamentally altered how they approached each other and the business, that the transparency and structure established would carry them through upcoming challenges, and that mutual respect and shared insight now governed their actions, leaving the office filled with a sense of clarity, order, and deliberate forward momentum. By dusk, the mountains beyond Denver had turned deep blue against a sky washed in gold, and Ethan Miller stood by the wide window of his home office with his hands in his pockets, watching the city settle into evening as if nothing had changed. Below, traffic moved along the streets in steady lines of red and white, office lights blinking on floor by floor, ordinary life continuing with its usual confidence. Behind him, Madison Miller sat quietly at the desk, the same desk where the morning had begun, with documents, tension, and truths neither of them could put back where they had found them. The papers were stacked now. The laptop was closed. The coffee cups had gone cold. Nothing dramatic remained in the room, and somehow that made the ending feel more honest. Madison rose slowly and came to stand a few feet away, close enough to speak without raising her voice, far enough to respect the distance the day had created. I keep thinking about last night, she said. Ethan did not turn right away. He watched a plane move across the fading sky, a small silver line heading west. So do I. Her breath caught softly, not with panic, but with the effort of saying something without dressing it up. I humiliated you because I thought your silence meant you did not care how people saw you. Ethan turned then, his expression calm but tired in a way no successful meeting could fix. My silence meant I trusted you not to use it against me. Madison looked down, and for the first time all day, she did not reach for a polished explanation. That mattered. Ethan had heard enough polished words to last a lifetime. He wanted plain ones now, even if they arrived late. I was wrong, she said. Not just at dinner. Before that, I let people think less of you because it made me look stronger. Outside, the city lights sharpened. Inside, the room felt smaller, but not suffocating. Just real. Ethan leaned against the window frame, folding his arms loosely. Strength that depends on shrinking someone else is not strength, he said. Madison nodded, her eyes glossy but steady. I know that now. He studied her face, the woman he had loved through lean years, late nights, failed launches, careful budgets, and the kind of ambition that had once inspired him before it started needing witnesses. He did not want revenge. That surprised him less than it would have years ago. Revenge was too loud for what he felt. What he wanted was respect that did not require proof every morning. Boundaries that did not have to be enforced with folders and votes. A marriage where support was not mistaken for weakness. He walked to the desk and placed one hand on the leather portfolio. The company will be fine if people tell the truth soon enough, he said. Maybe we will be too. But not because today scared you. Because tomorrow you choose differently when no one is watching. Madison absorbed the words slowly, like someone learning the weight of a promise before making it. What happens now? She asked. Ethan looked around the office. The framed photo from the Denver launch, the neat stacks of reports, the city glowing beyond the glass. Now the review continues. Richard answers for his decisions. The board gets transparency. Employees get stability. He paused, then met her eyes. And we stop pretending the background is where people put things that do not matter. Madison's shoulders lowered, a small release of tension. I do not want to be that person anymore. Ethan believed she meant it. He also knew meaning it was only the first mile of a long road. He picked up the framed photo from the launch and looked at the younger versions of them trapped behind glass. Madison smiling under bright lights. Ethan half visible near the edge. For years, that picture had bothered him without him admitting why. Now he understood. He had not been missing from the moment. He had been edited out of it. Ethan set the framed face down on the desk, not harshly, just finally. Madison watched him do it and did not object. That was another small beginning. The room settled into silence again, but this time it did not feel like humiliation. It felt like space. Ethan walked past her toward the doorway, then stopped with his hand near the frame. I am going for a drive, he said, just to clear my head. Madison nodded. Should I come? He considered it. A year ago, he might have said yes to avoid hurting her. Last night, he might have said no to make a point. Tonight, he chose the truth. Not this time. Her face tightened for a second, then softened with acceptance. Okay. Ethan took his keys from the small bowl by the door, the metal cool in his palm. As he stepped into the hallway, he felt no grand victory, no clean ending, no perfect restoration. Life was not that generous. But he felt something better than victory. He felt visible. The elevator carried him down through the building, past floors filled with strangers and lit windows, and when he walked into the Denver evening, the air was cool against his face. He crossed to his car, paused once to look back at the apartment lights above him, then opened the door and sat behind the wheel. For the first time in years, he did not feel like a man waiting for permission to take up space. He started the engine, pulled into the street, and drove toward the dark outline of the mountains, carrying with him the quiet knowledge that power was never the loudest voice in the room. Sometimes power was the man who stayed calm long enough for the truth to arrive, and when it did, he was finally ready to stand in it.